All right, so let's start with our sponsors for today. First of all, Fabio and Leah Niski of Passaic, New Jersey. B'schus refuah shlema for Ephraim Ben Shifra. Thank you very much. And also today, this is a sponsor from Yishai and Rebecca Schwartz. It's Yishai's grandfather's yortzeit is today. Li'ilui Nishmas Nachman Ben Avraham Shlomo. His neshama should have an aliyah.
Amen.
We are the fifth wide line. So we're just counting from the wide lines, fifth wide line, Tana Rabbanan. 3 words from the end of that line. Our rabbis taught as follows: Mishemesu Nevi'im Achronim. From the time that the last of the prophets died, who were the last prophets? Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi. Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi lived from the end of the first Beis Hamikdash era into the Babylonian exile, right? And they are the last of the Nevi'im. They're the last ones. The Nistalka Ruach HaKodesh MiYisrael. Once they passed away, then there was no more prophecy that was that existed. Now, one of the explanations for why that is that the entire time that the exile was taking place, and even when the second Beis Hamikdash was built, only a little over 42,000 Jews returned to rebuild the state when they rebuilt the second Beis Hamikdash. It's a really small number when you think about building the second Beis Hamikdash. They had 42,000 Jews in Eretz Yisrael, right? So a quarter of the size of the Jewish community in Toronto. That was the Jewish community in Eretz Yisrael during the second Beis Hamikdash era. Most of the Jews remained in exile, and it was not a happy time. In order to have prophecy, happiness is sort of a prerequisite. The environment was not conducive to prophecy in that time, so there was never, even during the second Beis Hamikdash period, there was never any prophecy. Now, v'afal pikein, even though that was the case, there were no more prophecies. Hayu mishtamshin bebaskol. They would get what was called a baskol, a heavenly voice on occasion would come out and speak and make declarations. And those they're not prophecies per se, but they were just statements. So, for example, Pamachas, one time, Hayu Mesubim Ba'aliyas Beis Guria. This is what we're talking about when the groups of the elders would get together and when they would have these kinds of gatherings. So they were sort of very holy occasions. So there was this group that was gathering together in the upper chamber of Beis Guria B'Yericho. And a heavenly voice came out from heaven and spoke to them. And it said, Yesh kan echad sheroish tishra of shchina. There is somebody in this group that really would be appropriate for Hashem's presence to dwell upon him. And the words Moshe Rabbeinu, the Maharsha takes them out because we wouldn't want to suppose that there's any prophet like Moshe Rabbeinu. One of the animamins is that there's no prophet lo kam b'Yisrael k'Moshe od, that there won't be another prophet like Moshe. However, others keep it in, saying that in every generation there is a leader who is for the sake of their generation, like the Moshe of that generation. So others keep it in. The only thing is that because of the nature of the environment, he wasn't able to get prophecy. This person should be able to get prophecy, but he can't because of the time that he lives in. The Chachamim looked around and they knew exactly who they were talking. Hillel the elder was amongst the group, and Hillel the elder made sense. Ukishemes, when he died, Amru Alav, they made a hesped, they made a eulogy about him. Hi Chassid, hi Anav. This person is a Chassid, and he is a righteous individual. He's also a very humble individual. Talmido shel Ezra. He is of the students of Ezra. Shuv Pam Achas. Another time. See, why is he the student of Ezra? Right, he didn't actually study under Ezra. Ezra would have been previous generations from before him, but that Ezra also was a Babylonian who rose to prominence and wound up leading the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael. So Hillel Zakin as well was fall into the same category. So he says he followed the pattern of Ezra. Another time, Hayu Mesubin Ba'aliyah B'Yavne. They were in a attic and upper chamber in Yavne. V'nas naleim baskol min hashamayim, and a heavenly voice came out from heaven. Yesh kan echad sheroi shetishral of shechina. There's somebody here who should be able to merit the divine presence. and get prophecy. El shein doro zaka lekach, but he is not living in an appropriate generation to have that happen. Nasnu chacham v'seinam b'shmuel hakatan. This is, I guess, where we were headed on this. They all looked around and they said Shmuel hakatan. That's the one. Ukeshemes, when he died, Amru alav, they said the same thing. Hay chassid hayanav talmido shel Hillel. He was of the students of Hillel's academy. Afhu amar b'shas misaso. They also said at the time of his death, Shimon v'Yishmael lecharva v'chavruhi lekatola usha'ar amal lebiza v'akan sigin asidin lemese al alma al alma. Shimon, who's the Nasi, and Yishmael ben Elisha, who's the Kohen Gadol, when Shmuel HaKatan was going to die, he had a prophecy right before he died. As we said, he was worthy of being able to receive prophecy. I guess at the end of his days, at that moment, he was able to receive this prophecy. And he said Shimon, who was the Nasi at the time, Shimon ben Gamliel, and Yishmael ben Elisha, who was the Kohen Gadol, they're going to die by the sword. And they're going to be other of the righteous individuals, the leaders of the generation, are also going to die by the sword, an untimely death. And the entire rest of the nation is going to go to spoils. And there's going to be many, many troubles that come into the world. That was how when he passed away. Now, what is he referring to? He was referring to, so Rabbi Shmuel and Shimon ben Gamliel are mentioned in the Asara Haruge Malchus, the 10 martyrs that we read about on Yom Kippur, and we read about them on Tisha B'Av. They were amongst, Shmuel Katan was the last generation before those elders, and the elders that were alive during his time suffered greatly under the harsh decrees of the Romans, and they prohibited learning Torah, and they went after. We're going to see a lot of discussion from that era in the Gemara coming up now, that there was this era during the times of the Romans. They went and they sought out to try to kill off the rabbis, the leaders of the generations, and there are the famous prayers on Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av talk about the 10 martyrs, the 10 leaders of the Jewish people. They all didn't live during the exact same period, even though they're all mentioned together in this one prayer. They were killed over a period over 100 years, 150 years or so. But nevertheless, these 10 martyrs were all part of this destruction of the Torah leadership that the Romans wanted to create. Now, Val Yehuda ben Bava Bakshu Lomarkin, Ela Shenitra Fasha, Shein Maspidin Al Haruge Malchus. And they also wanted to give the same eulogy to Yehuda ben Bava. We're going to learn all about Yehuda ben Bava coming up. They want to give this eulogy about Yehuda ben Bava, that he was a chassid and he was an anav in the same kind of category. But the thing is that they weren't able to give him a eulogy. Why? Because he was one of the 10 martyrs. And you don't give a public eulogy to one of the people that the king would execute. Why? Because then the king would presume that you're in partnership with him and league with him, and the king would not want you to be eulogizing those that he assassinated, those that he killed. So therefore, they weren't able to give Yehuda ben Bava such a eulogy, but he was appropriate that he should have gotten such a eulogy. We're going to see what made him such a huge Talmid Chacham, or such a huge hero, aside from being a Talmid Chacham, in the Gemara in a moment. Now, Tana Rabbanan Rabbis learn, Ein ma'avrin es hashana, el imkein yirtzeh nasi. They don't add an extra month to the year unless there's the permission from the nasi. Okay, the nasi has to give his permission. Umaisa, there was a story from Gamliel. Now, this is where we get into this period of time that we're really going to be exclusively focusing in on. This period of time that was very difficult for the Jewish people, and so there's a story where Rabbi Gamliel
just came back from like.
This is later.
Right
this
is
towards the end. This period is towards the end of the first base. Towards the end of the first base of Mikdash. Even Rabbi Akiva is the year 132, 135. Okay. So we're after the destruction of the base of Mikdash. So this is the times. Even Yavne, we're talking about Yavne. Yavne was where the Sanhedrin moved after the destruction of the base of Mikdash. So this is. The period towards the end of the second base of Mikdash, leading into the time after, immediately following the destruction of the base of Mikdash, where the Romans were incredibly harsh and they were trying to destroy the rest of the Jewish people.
But weren't they doing? Didn't it go from Wasn't it Zvugos at that time?
Yes. No, Zvugos are earlier in the beginning of the second base of Migdash.
Oh, the Nasi
right?
came after.
Shmayan of Avtalion and Hillel and Shammai all lived during the time period of the second base of Migdash.
Oh, okay, fine.
Right. So these are later on. These are the later Tanoim lived at the end of the second base of Migdash and beyond the destruction of the base of Migdash. So Rabbi Gamliel, there was a story. Shahalach told Rishus Eitzel Shilton Echad Shebesuria. He went to Syria in order to get some kind of official judicial permission for something. Right, he had to check on something in Syria. Now, there's important historical perspective on why he's going to Syria. During the reign of Hadrian, the emperor of Rome, from I want to say about 78 until 138 or so. So he's the emperor of the emperor of Rome, and he was particularly cruel to the Jews during the Bar Kokhba rebellion. He was the emperor during the Bar Kokhba rebellion, and he sends in all kinds of troops in order to be able to. He had to pull legions of Roman soldiers from as far away as the Britons in order to be able to put down this rebellion, which was quite fierce in Judea. So one of the things that Hadrian did when they finally won is they were trying to wipe out all the rabbis, right? Akiva was one of the big proponents of the Bar Kokhba rebellion. The Rambam tells us that Rabbi Akiva felt that Bar Kokhba was the Mashiach. Yeah. He was going to be the Mashiach, and he was going to bring the reconstruction of the third base of Migdash, and that was where Rabbi Akiva thought was supposed to happen, right? And Rambam brings it as a principle is that there's nothing wrong with thinking somebody is going to be the Mashiach, but as soon as you find out that he isn't, then you let that go, right? You say, okay, well, I guess he wasn't. He could have been, right? But he died before he was able to fulfill the requirements of the Mashiach, so he wasn't the Mashiach. But Rabbi Akiva was taken with him and felt that he could have been. In any event, the Bar Kokhba rebellion is put down. Now, after that, Hadrian wants to punish the Jews. So one of the things that he does is the area that was where Judea was, the whole land of where Eretz Yisrael was renamed Philistina, right, where the name Palestine comes from. And the reason he did that is because the Plishtim lived in the area on the coast. Right, that was the Plishtim were the arch nemesis of the Jewish people for a long period of time before the first base of Migdash and for 1,000 years while the Jewish people were in that area. And so he took the name of the Plishtim, who were living on that side where Gaza is, essentially was where they were living, and he renamed the entire area from where Eretz Yisrael was all the way into Syria into this name Philistina. And so that way it was a punishment to the Jews that their land was renamed. So when we have this name, the Palestine, we understand where it comes from. It was from Hadrian punishing the Jews for this Bar Kokhba rebellion. Another thing that he did was he moved the seat of government from Eretz Yisrael over to Syria, right, in order to degrade this as a province, right, where up until that time there were Jewish kings and there were Jewish governors that were leading the area in Eretz Yisrael. He said, you guys are not going to have your own governors or your own leaders anymore. Can't trust any of you. Rather, the people who are in charge of Syria are now going to be in charge of the whole area. So that would make sense why Rabbi Gamliel, I'm supposing, would be off in Syria meeting with important government officials, and he was not present. V'shaho lavo, he was delayed in coming back. Ve'ibru es hashana, and the rabbis were meeting, and they were deciding that they wanted to add an extra month in the year for a leap year. Almanas shiur to Rabbi Gamliel, and they said, well, it'll be on condition. When Rabbi Gamliel comes back, if he agrees with our calculation, then it'll go forward, and if not, not. Ukeshabar Rabbi Gamliel, the Amar wrote Ani, when Rabbi Gamliel came back, and he said, yes, I give permission, named Tish Shana Meuberis. Then it was effective. The adding the extra month was required. As we said, it required the Nasi's permission. Tana Rabbanan. These are the reasons why. Now, when they were getting together to decide whether we should add an extra month or not, these are the conditions, these are the questions that they had to ask to determine whether the seasons were getting out of control and whether they needed to be able to push spring back, right, by adding an extra month, pushing the Jewish calendar forward. So, for example, they may have had to fix. There's the rainy season before that, so they may have had to fix the roads and fix any bridges that got washed out. That they knew that they needed to have ovens to bake matzahs, and if the ovens were still wet from the rainy season, then they wouldn't bake well. So they needed to be able to make sure that everything dried out. Also, people were further away. Some Jews were further away from the center from where Yerushalayim was, and so those that didn't start their journey, those who started their journey but weren't going to be able, if they saw they weren't going to be able to reach, maybe the weather was bad or whatever it was, they weren't going to be able to reach in time, so they would delay Pesach by an extra month in order to give them time to arrive. Aval, however, here's what would not be. Lo mipnei hasheleg, v'lo mipnei hatzina, not because it was snowing, nor because it was too cold. I guess that wouldn't hold people back from traveling, I suppose, right? If the Beis HaMikdash was in the warmer climate in the middle of Eretz Yisrael, going from wherever you live in the snowy areas down to the warmer place, you would not have held back from doing that just because it was snowy or cold. So that wasn't going to stop people. V'lo mipnei golis yisrael shelo akrim koman. Also, if the Jews did not leave where they were from, then that wouldn't be an excuse. They had to start moving. They had to start traveling. Tana Rabbanan. We would not add an extra month because the animals were too young, right? The gestational period of a sheep or a goat, I believe, is 5 months. I looked it up. It's about 5 months. There's a Gemara that talks about it, and I could not remember. It was either 5 or 6 months, but about 5 months or so is a gestational period. Apparently, there's a mating season, so that they all give birth approximately around the same time. If the seasons start to get out of whack, then you're going to have exceptionally young animals in your flock. You need them for the Korban Pesach. You need them for the Korban Chagiga. So if the animals are too small, then you might think, well, remember, you only are going to be able to bring animals for the Korban Pesach that are in their first year. So therefore, the young animals, the ones that are being born this year, those are the ones I'm bringing them as my sacrifice. If this year is now getting too late, so I'm going to have exceptionally young animals, which are not going to be very good for dinner. So therefore, you might think that you want to delay a month in order to give them a chance to grow up a little bit. But no, we do not, because after all, for a Korban Pesach, you only need to eat a kazayas. You don't have to, obviously, it'd be great for you to have larger amounts of veal at the barbecue, but if you can't, so then a kazayas is all that's necessary, and so therefore you should go ahead. That's not a good reason to be able to hold back. V'lo mipnei ha gozlos, also, it's not because, let's say, you had to bring other types of offerings for birds, like, for example, ladies who gave birth. So they would have to bring nests of birds as their sacrifice. Those you wouldn't hold up for either, even though you wouldn't, let's say the birds were not hatching yet. Not a problem, because you can delay. You don't have to bring those that time when you come by Pesach. You can theoretically bring them the next time you come up for the next Yom Tov at Sukkot and bring those sacrifices then. So you could delay that. That they didn't start to sprout or fly. However, these are additional reasons, meaning if we're going to see later on some other additional reasons why you might need to add an extra month, you could take one of these reasons and add it to those other reasons and say, well, since we've already got a major reason to be able to delay in order to add an extra month, we can add this into the equation as well. So it would it wasn't enough to be able to add an extra month by itself, right, but you can add it to the equation. Ketzad, so Rabbi Yanai Omer, how would this work? Rabbi Yanai said, Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Mehodian anachnu lechon. So he would send the following announcement. I'm informing you, de Gozlaya Rekichin, ve'imraya de Arkin, ve'zim de Aviva lo mata. So he sent as follows. He said, this is what the Nasi would be able to set to make his announcement. He would say, "We are announcing and making everybody aware that the sheep are too young, and the goats, the sheep are too skinny, and the season has not arrived yet. It's too early. Spring is not here yet. Okay, ushvaras milsa ba'anpai. So therefore, it seems appropriate in my eyes. V'osifas al shasa da tilson yomin. I'm adding 30 more days to the year, and that would be the announcement that he would make, right? So he would give the rationale behind his decision in it, and you can see this was an example of how the rationale would work. The main reason being because the season didn't arrive yet, wasn't spring by the time Pesach arrived. And aside from that, also I'm throwing into this the consideration that the animals were too young and they were not old. Therefore, I'm adding another 30 days on. Okay, so now Meisvei, very interesting. Kama ibur shana. What is the amount when we do an extra month in the year? How much are we adding into this leap year. Shloshim Yom, 30 days. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says Chodesh. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says a Chodesh, which is 29 days. Amar Rav Papa. Rav Papa says Ratzu Chodesh, Ratzu Shloshim Yom, whichever they wanted. It could be a 29-day month. It could be a 30-day month. It's completely up to them to decide. And what are the conditions? What are the reasons why we would add 29 days versus 30 days? Remember, it's good for us to start calculating forward 6 months to be able to avoid Adu Rosh, right? We want to be able to try to make sure that Rosh Hashanah never falls out on Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday, as we described, that those are bad times. So we won't be able to add that extra day, take that extra day away in order to be able to set up the next 6 months. Okay. Tochazi mai ikabein takifoi kadmai le'an le'in vosni basroi. Let's take a look at the difference between the original generations, that they were strong, known for their strength and power, and yet they were more humble, it would seem, than the later generations, meaning that the earlier generations were greater, that even though they were stronger and tougher, and we'll see how, they still had greater humility. Tanya, here we have a brisa. Maisa be Rabban Gamliel, there was a story of Rabban Gamliel, who was right? So there's Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, and then there's Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel was the son of Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, right? So there was 2 Gamliels in the lineage here. He was sitting on one of the steps on Har HaBayis where the Beis HaMikdash was. V'haya Yochanan Sofer Halaz Omed Lefanov, and Rabbi Yochanan, who was the sofer at the time, was standing before him. V'shalosh igros chatuchos lefanov, and he had 3 letters that he had scored. He had the letters ready to be written, ready in front of him. Amar lo, he said, Tol igros ochada, take the first letter, and I want you to write the first thing, because he was sending it out to 3 different provinces that were 3 different sections where the Jewish people lived. And he would say like this, V'kosov lachana b'nei Galila, to our brethren who live in the north, in the Galil. Ila la'achana b'nei Galila tata shlomchon. So he says to our brothers in the upper Galil, and to our brothers that are in the lower Galil, shlomchon, you should peace be unto you. Yaske mehod shlomchon yaske, right? That you should have lots of peace. Mehodon anachno lechon. I am making you aware. Dizman biura mata laafrushe masra mimatana laafrushe masra. Sorry, Dizman biura mata. The time for the destruction, for the completion of the tithing is arrived. Meaning we're getting to the end of the year, and so as we get to the end of the year, we have to remind you that the yearly tithes, there's a different tithe that was being brought in the first year, second year, and the third year. We had to be up by the beginning of the 4th year. You had to complete giving away all the tithes that were supposed to be given by the first 3 years, and by the 7th year, you had to get rid of all the tithes in years 4, 5, and 6. Right, so you had to get rid of all your Meiser Rishon, all your Meiser Sheni, all your Trumos. Everything had to be distributed to the Levium, distributed to the Kohanim, because people might have said, "Oh, I've got the Truma," and they put it in their storehouse, and when I meet a Kohen, I'll give it to him. Well, now's the time. It's time to get all of that out of the way, right? Get rid of that. And also, lafrushe masra mimatana dezeisa. You also have to start remembering that you've got olives that are in your containers that are softening in the process of making olive oil. One of the first things they would do is they take the olives and they would put them into large containers, and they would start to soften up and over-ripen in those containers. So you've got all of that oil and those olives that are there. Remember to take your Trumas and Meisters off of those things as well, because even though the olive oil hasn't flown from them in the process, you have to start taking off those as well. V'tol igris ochada. So that was the first letter he wrote. Now take another letter, uksov, and write as follows: Lachana b'nei Droma, our brother in the south, shlomchon yaskei, you should have much peace. Ma'odin anachnu lachon, I'm informing you that Dizman biura mata, again the same thing, that the time for eliminating all of the trumos and meisters from your house has come. Lafrushi masra be'omri shibolya. And it's time for you to start taking all the meiser from the grains. They would have all their grains. They would lay them out to dry. That was the grain areas were in that portion. So he warned them about that. V'tol igros achada, and take a third letter and write as follows: Ksov lachana b'nei galvasa. We should write to the letter to our brothers that are in Galvasa and that are in Golos. bebavel. Ulachana, so he would write like this. B'nei, so he says, Ulachana b'ma, and, sorry, where the comma is. Tola gross achada ksof, lachana b'nei Gavasa bebavel ulachana de. So write to our brothers who are in exile in Bavel and our brothers who are in Madai, where the Medes were. Ulashar kol kalvasa Yisrael, and any place else that anybody else is in exile. Shlomchan yehei yasgei. You should be peace should be to you. Liolam mahodian anachnu lechon gozalia rekichin veimra arkin. He said that he would inform them that the sheep are very young. And the goats, they're too skinny. Uzmana da aviva lomata, and the time of the ripening has not arrived. The season of the spring has not arrived. Ushafra milsa be'anpai ube'anpe chavrai, and it makes sense for me and in the eyes of my friends. Vosifas al shota da yomin tlosin, and it seems to me that both me and the other rabbis that we want to add another 30 days on. So therefore, what's the difference is that this Rabbi Gamliel was indicating that he was getting permission from himself, not only himself, but from all the other rabbis. So he's the older, this is the original generation, Rabbi Gamliel, who's the older generation, the bigger tzaddik, and he was making his statement when he wrote all of his letters. He made the statement that not only do I think it's a good idea, but I took permission from all the other rabbis as well. And the later generations, his offspring, his future generations, they said it was appropriate in my eyes only. So we see the reduction of the generations. There wasn't as much humility in the later generations. So the Gemara answers no. Dilma Basar de Avruhu. Maybe this is the story occurred after Rabbi Gamliel was already removed from the yeshiva. Now, this is a great story. And again, it's one of these that can go for an hour shiur, but we're not going to do that. We'll just mention very quickly. In many Gemaras, Rabbi Gamliel had a conflict with Rabbi Yeshua, that Rabbi Yeshua would often have a difference of halachic opinion, and Rabbi Gamliel was very sensitive at this point in time, in particular, when it was towards the end of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, and he didn't want to have the halachos unclear. So there's a story in the Mishnah about how Rabbi Yeshua calculated the time for Yom Kippur differently than Rabbi Gamliel. And Rabbi Gamliel forced him to appear on the day that Rabbi Yeshua calculated for his Yom Kippur together with his walking stick and his wallet to be able to demonstrate that he was wrong publicly. And there are multiple times in various Gemaras when Rabbi Gamliel calls out Rabbi Yeshua, makes him stand up and makes a statement that he is wrong to disagree with Rabbi Gamliel. Eventually, the other rabbis got sick of this. They did not like that Rabbi Gamliel was picking on Rabbi Yeshua to this way, and they removed him from being the Rosh Yeshiva. And then they decided who should be in charge instead. They could not make Rabbi Yeshua. He's involved in the argument, so they got Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, but Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was only 18 years old, right? So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was given these white hairs. This is the story of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, was given these white hairs to look older, and he took, in the Haggadah, that's the one, right? So he takes over from Rabbi Gamliel's place in charge of the Beis Medrash. Now, one of the things that are very important about when he took over is they had these very strict restrictions on who can get into yeshiva. And this is why one of the reasons I love the story. They had these strict restrictions. To get into yeshiva, you had to be Tocho Kibor. They would investigate you to make sure that you were really worthy of being in yeshiva. And when Rabbi Gamliel,
You have to pay.
You also have to pay. Yes, that's also true. Right. But that was all the way from behind. That was like from Rabbi Akiva and his rabbis from Hillel. That was always the case. Paying for yeshiva is always the case. But getting into the yeshiva was a difficult thing. Well, when Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah took over, they removed all of the restrictions and said anybody who wants to come learn can learn. And they added on tons of space into the Beis Medrash, and more people came learning, and Rabbi Gamliel felt terrible. That's what the Gemara says. He felt terrible about it, and he thought maybe I made a mistake. And they told him, no, you just don't know what's going on. You could see they look like they're learning that. But the Gemara has the conclusion, no, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was correct. And eventually what wound up happening is that Rabbi Gamliel was reaccepted as the Rosh Yeshiva, and they made an agreement. What are they supposed to do? They're not going to remove Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. He shared the Rosh Yeshiva position. They had a co-Rosh Yeshiva. Rabbi Gamliel would give the main drasha 3 times a month, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah would do it 1 time a month. So therefore, this Gemara is saying, why is Rabbi Gamliel being so humble and sharing with permission of myself and all of the other rabbis? Because after that experience, whether either the rabbis removed him or even the fact that he had to get permission, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was also the Rosh Yeshiva as well, he couldn't simply make a declaration and say, I said so. Whereas even though his children and his grandchildren, they could have made such a declaration. So therefore, that's the explanation in this Gemara. Even if the letters were difficult for me to read. Okay, Tana Rabbana, Rabbi's learn. Al Shlosh Devarim Me'avrin Es Hoshana. These are the 3 main reasons why we're going to add an extra month into the year. Al Ha'aviv, for the seasons. Okay, so first of all, let's remember we discussed a little bit yesterday, but today I drew a picture, okay? So this is the sun, right? And this is the earth that travels around the sun 365 days, okay? There are
22 degrees.
Approximately. I didn't take out my protractor. Right? It might be 22.6, but who's counting? In any event, so this is what goes on. So there are 4 seasons in the calendar, right? We call them winter, spring, summer, and fall. They're much simpler named in Hebrew. We have Tekufas Nisan, Tekufas Tammuz, Tekufas Tishrei, and Tekufas Teves, because that's the month in which the seasons fall, right? So March is the spring, Tekufas Nisan is the spring, right? Summer is Tekufas Tammuz, Tekufas Tishrei is the fall, and winter is Tekufas Teves.
They're called also Rosh Hashanahs, right? They're the 4 Rosh Hashanahs. We have 4
No,
Rosh
they're not the 4 Rosh Hashanahs. They're not the 4 Rosh Hashanahs.
Tishrei has 1, Nisan has 1.
Yes. And then Shvat.
Shvat.
And
right.
then, right. And 2 so it's not the same ones. That's correct. Okay. Not the same ones. Okay. So these 2 times, right, summer and winter, you can see that the northern hemisphere, where we are, is leaning towards the sun in the summer. That's why it's warm. And it's away from the sun in the winter. That's why it's cold. But during these seasons, the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere are equidistant from the sun. That's why they're called the equinox. They're the points where they are equal. They are approximately, for the sake of our Gemara and simplicity, as I said, we can give a shiur on the Saint Mater Livracha and how the Gregorian calendar changes things and everything is off and that really it's not the amount of time it takes to go around the sun is not really 365 days, it's 365 and a quarter days, and therefore it throws everything off, and they didn't realize that from the Julian calendar, and it was Pope Gregory who readjusted the calendar and things. Okay, all that being the case, to keep things simple, the Jewish people have been calculating that the seasons are approximately 91 and a quarter. This is to keep it simple. It's 91 days, 7 hours, and odd number 544 chalakah. I'm not saying, but whatever it is, it's somewhere in that neighborhood. About 91 and a quarter days between each season. Okay, so they go around and around. That means that Nisan comes out approximately March 20th. The summer comes approximately June 20th. Tishrei comes approximately September 22nd. And winter is approximately December 21st. It's really 21st, 22nd. Give off a day. Again, it depends on where you are relative to leap years, whether it's exactly the 21st or the 22nd, whether it's the 20th or the 21st. But I said, for the sake of our Gemara, let's round it off and just, keep it simple. When we start to get March 20th starts to come out in the wrong time, that's when we start to know that it's time to make an extra month into our year. That's what this first one is. Okay. So therefore, when Al Aviv is the first one, the second one is Al Peiros Al Aviv is not that first. That's the third one is Al Tkufa. But Al Aviv is the first one is when we start to see that the grain is not ripening in time, and Al Peiros Elon, if the fruit in the trees are not growing in time, the Al Hatkufa, and also with the season doesn't come out at its appropriate time. So Al Shnai Mehen Ma'avrim. We need 2 of these signs in order to be able to add an extra month. We did already say that if you have one of these plus some of the other signs we mentioned in the other brises, that could also be a reason to add an extra month as well. But not just on one of them. Now, if one of these is because the grain is not ripening, everybody gets very happy about that. Why? Because by delaying, we wind up making it so that the grain will ripen. And that's a nice, important thing because the second day of Pesach, we have an important sacrifice called the Korban HaOmer. The Korban HaOmer allows us to eat whatever grain already has been harvested and grown in the previous year. Up until the Korban HaOmer, anything that's grown after the Korban HaOmer has to be put in storage until next year, and then the Korban HaOmer comes, and then we open up our storehouses and we can eat that again. If you delay Nisan, and therefore you push the Korban HaOmer later, the entire another month of harvesting can take place, which you can eat immediately. So you can see how everybody would be very happy to have so much more food by delaying the year based on the fact that the grain wasn't ripening. Okay, so that's a good thing. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, ala tekufa, also he says for the season. Now, iboiluhu. So now, where the question is this: when Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says also on the season, what do you mean? Was he saying on the season smechin that people were happy? Why? Because the season tells us what the weather is going to be. It's a very rainy season up until it gets to the spring in Eretz Yisrael. So if the delay is another month in order to allow the season, that means that the trip from your house to Yerushalayim is a much simpler and easier trip. People might have been very happy about that. Oh, ala tkufa mavrin, or are we saying that simply based on the season, that by itself might be enough of a reason in order to add an extra month by itself? So teku. So that is unclear. It was unclear what Rav Shimon Gamliel meant by saying on the tkufa. Okay, so now, Tana Rabbanan, al shlosh artzos ma'avrin es hashana. There were 3 locations to make things a little bit more complicated because we love being able to figure out what everybody was calculating here. There are 3 jurisdictions, right? 3 distinct areas of Eretz Yisrael, and we had to be able to figure out whether crops were ripening and fruits were growing in each of the different in each of the different locations, not simply, and they each had different crops in each of the locations. So you couldn't just say, oh, well, the wheat's not ripening. Well, that's not ripening where? It might be ripening in some places and others. So Yehuda, the Aver HaYarden, Yehuda is one, Aver HaYarden, the other side of the Jordan River, and the Galil was in the mountains of the Galil. Al shtayim mehen ma'avrin. If 2 out of the 3 provinces had these difficulties that we described, so then we're going to add an extra month. Val achas mehen ein ma'avrin. And if it's only one of them, so then no, right? So that's not going to be enough. Ubizman sheYehuda achas mehen. If Yehuda is one of the 2 provinces that is having trouble, and therefore we're going to delay hakol smechin. They are all happy. Why? Shein omer ba elam Yehuda, because you needed to have the grain grow in Yehuda so that you can cut that grain and make the Korban Omer from it. Right? The barley was the first crop that grew. They would cut it down in Yehuda. The Beis Hamikdash was in Yehuda territory, and they would bring the Korban Omer there from that section. It was best, not required, but best if it came from Yehuda. So therefore, when the delay, right, if the delay was because that Yehuda, right, if the other provinces were, if Yehuda wasn't, the crops weren't growing, right, and Yehuda was one of those provinces, delaying would allow Yehuda's crops to grow, and therefore they'd be able to use those crops in the Korban Omer. That made people happy. Tana Rabbanan, ein ma'avrin es hashanim ela b'Yehuda. We don't calculate the leap year unless we're in the area of Yehuda, meaning that we have to be in Yerushalayim in order to make this calculation.
Can I ask one question?
Yes.
When Yehuda and Yisrael were broken up, was there ever a machlokes in terms of did they have 2 different basins in terms of the whole first
Beis Hamikdash era is characterized by a complete difference of rulership between the upper kingdom and the lower kingdom.
Right. So were there arguments about the calendar? Was there differences in the calendar?
So much so that the upper kingdom didn't want anybody going to the Beis Hamikdash for any of the Shlosh Regalim, and they set up idols in order to prevent anybody from going to and they set up guards and people to stop people from going to the Beis Hamikdash.
Wow.
Right? Yeah. No, it was not a good time. All the kings in Yisrael were basically all of them were wicked. Right, and so they wanted to keep everybody from doing that.
Wow.
Okay. Now, and then when the Assyrian kings exiled the 10 tribes at the end of the First Temple era, the 10 tribes never came back for the second Beis Hamikdash. So there was no different state in the second Beis Hamikdash. It was all Yehuda,
right.
but it was a much smaller country, much fewer people in the second Beis Hamikdash era. So it was the 10 tribes were all exiled at the end of the first Beis Hamikdash, never came back.
Right.
Okay, so now, if they did do this calculation in the Galil, Meuberes, it would work. Heid Chananya ish Ono, Chananya, a man from Ono, testified, Imi Bru Begalil, Eina Meuberes. That is not true. If they did this calculation in Galil, that was not acceptable. Why? Because we're going to say that there's a pasuk that seems to indicate that rulings of this type, of major rulings for the community, have to be done in Yerushalayim. Rabbi Yehuda, Brei Reb Shimon ben Pazi, my time. What is the reason? Why did Chananya Ish Ono say that? Amar Kro, the pasuk says, L'shichno tidrashu ubasa shama. Where Hashem's presence dwells, that's where you should investigate the rules and go there. Kol drisha shata doresh. Any time that you're going to be making a public a declaration or an investigation on behalf of the public, lo yu ella b'shchino shel makom. It has to be in the dwelling place of Hashem. Tana Rabbana, Rabbi said, "Ema avrinis hashana ella bayom." You're only allowed to make these calculations during the daytime. V'im avru b'layla. If you did this calculation at night, einet mubaris, it does not work. Ve'ein mekachinas achodesh ella bayom. And we also don't establish Rosh Chodesh except during the day, and if they made that court decision at night, Eino Mekudesh, it does not work. Amar Rabbi Abba Mikro, where's the pasuk that says that? Tikuba Chodesh Shofar Bekesa Yom Chagenu. You should blow the shofar on the holiday in which the moon is covered. So Ezu Chag Shachodesh Miskasebo, which is the holiday in which the moon is covered. So that's Haviyomer Zer Rosh Hashanah. That's Rosh Hashanah. Uksiv, then it says, Ki chok li Yisrael hu. It is a rule for the Jewish people, Mishpat leLohe Yaakov. Ma Mishpat Bayom, which tells me as follows. Just like all rulings, all Beis-Dins have the rule that they can only make judgments during the daytime. Af Kiddush HaChodesh Bayom. Also, the establishment of Rosh Hashanah, and therefore any other Rosh Chodesh as well, can only be done during the day. So therefore, it follows the rules of every other court. I guess every other, the court proceedings have to be done during the day. Tana Rabbanan. Ein ma'avrin Hashanah bishnei ravon. We don't add a leap year if we are in a famine, right? That's right. We don't when there's no wheat left and we need to be able to get to the new year. So we need to open up the storehouses where the grain is. We need to get that Korban Omer here as soon as possible. Delaying it an extra month is really bad. So therefore, we're not going to add an extra month if there's a famine. Tanya, we learn a brisa. Rabbi Yomer, he says, "V'ish ba mi Baal Shalisha." There was a man who came from a place called Baal Shalisha. V'yavo ish Elohim lechem bikurim. This is a pasuk in Malachim Beis, right? And a man and v'yavo leish Elohim lechem bikurim, and he brought to the man of God who is Elisha, is what this is talking about. He brought him first bread which was esrim, which was 20 loaves, lechem seorim, which was bread that was made from barley. Now, here's what this is how we're going to learn that it was a year of famine and that they didn't add an extra year. The best, the place where all the grain ripens earliest in Eretz Yisrael is Baal Shalisha. So this guy came from the place where the crops were growing the earliest. And even still, because of that, this guy was only able to bring barley bread. That was the only grain that had ripened. Now, Shema Tomar Chitim, you might think that he could have brought, he was bringing wheat bread. Talmud Lomar Seorim, the pasuk specifically says, he brought barley bread. He was bringing the only grain that they had. Seorim is the first grain that sprouts in the first location. That's all they had. Shema Tomar Lif. So therefore, how did they have so little? Because they were rushing. They wanted to get they wanted to, it should have been a year that they should have pushed off to a leap year, but they didn't, right? They were trying to get to open the storehouses by having the Korban Omer. So therefore, so now, Shema Tomer Lifnei Omer, maybe this was happening and it was before the Omer. So Talmud Lomar, therefore it says, Tein la'am v'yochlu, give to the nation all of the crops that we have and from this bread, and they'll be able to eat it. So therefore, Achar Omer Haya, if he's giving from the new crop, he's giving from this bread that they had, so it must have been after the Omer. And what do you see? There, you see that it was after the Korban Omer already was, and nevertheless, there was no grain that had ripened yet. Why was the Korban Omer so early that year? The answer is because it was a famine, so they did not want to delay the Korban HaOmer. So they quickly made the Korban HaOmer in order to open up whatever they had stored in the granaries so that they would at least be able to have something to eat. We can see from the story that should have been a year that they would have pushed the extra month into the year. Malo Ibra, Elisha. Why did Elisha not make it an extra month in the year? Because it was a famine. Everybody was running to the storehouses in order to be able to open up and eat whatever they had stored from the previous year. You're not allowed to calculate a new year before Rosh Hashanah. And if they did so, right? You got to wait till 6 months before. Why? People will forget. Remember, it makes a difference because it makes changes when Pesach is and chametz and everything. So therefore, starting too early is no good. Right?
6 months before.
6 months before is the earliest you're allowed to start the calculations. However, if there's an emergency, like the Romans are not going to let you do it, you can start immediately after Rosh Hashanah. In other words, why wait? Why do it now? Why not wait until you got to Adar? And then you can better read the environment better and see how the rain is going and see how the crops are going. No, if you're worried that the Romans are going to stop you and you have an opportunity to make the calculation now, right after Rosh Hashanah, do it.
So ER would be is basically where it stops. End of ER is either end of ER or after Rosh Hashanah.
We're starting at Rosh Hashanah,
right?
And we're ending in.
You said 6 months before, but you said before 6 months before is ER.
Adar. Right, we're going to be able to do this from Rosh Hashanah, which is Tishrei to Adar.
Tishrei to Adar.
Right, Adar. Then if we do, we're going to be able to add an extra month. If we get past Adar, we're into Nisan already. Of the next year, it's too late. You can't add a month in. Right, so you've got up until Adar, the end of Adar, to add an extra month in.
Isn't Rosh Hashanah the 7th month?
Yeah, 7. So you're looking at 7. Depends on where you start. So Rosh Hashanah is 7th month until the 12th month. Right,
7th month to the 12th. Oh, okay.
Right, 7 to 12. That's your time period to be able to do these calculations. V'afal pikein, even still, in ma'avrin ela adar, even though you might be making these calculations and it's Tishrei, the extra month you add is always Adar. Right, you don't add an extra Tish. You don't add an extra Cheshvan. Right, the month you always add as an extra Adar. Is that true? V'hashalchu leila Rava. But didn't they send a message to Rava? Zugba. The last letter was difficult to read. This one is completely in code. And why is it in code? Because they were hiding what they were doing from the Romans. Okay? And it goes like this. I'm going to try to remember how it goes. Zugba merekas. There is a pair. A pair refers to the sages, right? A pair because the rabbis were zugos. And they're coming from Rekas, which is from Tveria. V'tafsu nesher, and eagles caught them. Now, in the book of Daniel, the Persians are called eagles. So therefore, they're giving a hint, right? They were rabbis, they were coming, they were going to calculate the months, but they got captured by the Persians. Ubiyadam devarim hanasib eluz. In their possession, they had, this is what their crime was they got caught with, they had things that were made in luz. When we get to have a conversation, mind you, what did they have? Tchelas. When we get to have a good long conversation about tchelas, when we get to Maseches Menachos, we'll get to have a whole long conversation about tchelas. But tchelas was considered a color that, because it was rare, the dye that was for tchelas was only for royalty. And so therefore the Persians outlawed its general use. And so therefore that's one of the reasons why tchelas completely fell out of use and why we have our tzitzis without tchelas, right, is because the Persians outlawed the Jews wearing it. And for a long time, nobody wore tchelas, or tzitzis just didn't have it because of the Persians. So they caught these rabbis, they were having tchelas. Now, bizchus harachamim uvischusam yetzu b'shalom. Now, so in order for, hopefully they'll be meritorious in the merit of Hashem's mercy, and in their own merits, they will be hopefully get out of jail peacefully. Va'amuse yereche nachshon, and the officer that came from the loins of Nachshon. Nachshon was Nachshon ben Aminadav, who was the leader, the Nasi of the tribe of Yehuda. So these officers from Shevet Yehuda, basically the Nasi, right? He's from Shevet Yehuda. Bikshu likvoa nitziv echad. They wanted to appoint an officer. Now, this was a euphemism. The officer meaning an extra month. The Nasi is giving permission. They want to be able to establish a leap year. Velo hinichan edomi halaz Now, that certain Edomite, who's Esav, who's the Romans, would not permit it. Aval, Bali Asufos Nasfu, however, the congregational leaders gathered, i.e. the rabbis, they gathered together, the Kavulo, and they established it. Netziv Echad B'Yerach Shemesbo Aaron HaKohen, they gathered together and they made this declaration on the month that Aaron died in it. Now, the month that Aaron died was Av. Okay, so the question is, how did they calculate this month when it's an Av? Av is before Elul, which is before Tishrei. So therefore, they shouldn't have been able to be allowed to make this calculation. So the answer is Chashuvi mechashve galuyi lo megalu. The answer is, well, it was an emergency. Clearly, they were talking in code and writing letters that they were going to be captured and all that. So they were able to calculate it. They did their calculations, but they weren't allowed to reveal it. They weren't allowed to tell anybody about it. My mashma dahay nitziv lishna diyarcha. Now, in their code, they use the word nitziv, a officer. That's an odd language for meaning a month. Why does, for all the other words that are in there that mean things that they don't mean, but why is it that they use the word nitziv to mean a month? So the answer is, Dichsiv, the pasuk says, V'li Shlomo shnei masar nitzivim. Shlomo had 12 officers. I'll call Yisrael the Jewish people. V'kilkulus hamelach ves anashav chodesh bashana. Each one of these officers had the responsibility of taking care of the king and all of the palace for 1 month. They were tax collectors, so they had to provide funding from their families for the king for 1 month of the year. So therefore, you see that these officers were appointed for 1 month a year sessions. Hence, these officers equals a month. But what are you going to do with the pasuk that says there was one officer on all of the land? So Rav Yehuda Rav Nachman, so there's a difference of opinion between Rav Yehuda and Rav Nachman how they understood it. There was one head officer who's in charge of all 12, so doesn't take away from the point, right? The others was they had to establish a 13th officer because sometimes it's a leap year. So the 13th officer was in charge of the leap years. Okay, Tana Rabbanan. A rabbi's you're not allowed to calculate ahead of the game and figure out now we see that next year is going to need to be a leap year. So therefore, we're calculating for next year. You don't do that. You're also not allowed to make calculations for 3 consecutive. You're not allowed to do 3 consecutive leap years. Rabbi Shimon, but there was a story of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, presumably after the Bar Kokhba rebellion, was incarcerated, right? And eventually he was killed as part of the Assyria Haruge Malchus. Could not say it. So now he was one of the 10 martyrs. So he's in jail. He was in jail for about 2 or 3 years, right? He was there in jail. And he calculated the 3 years. He calculated the leap years while he was in jail. So the question is, how did he do that? Must have been that he, this year, next year, and the year after. How did he do that? So the answer is, Amrullah, they said, Misham Raya, that's your proof. Based in Yashvu Kavu Achas Achas Bismana. No. He just calculated what the next 3 leap years would be. He said this year, 3 years from now, and 5 years from now are leap years. Then Basin took his calculations and they established it at the right time. They didn't do 3 years in a row. Tana Rabban and Rabbis learn. We don't make a leap year on Shemitah year. Why? There's no food. You don't want to lengthen a year that you have no food growing. The year after, Shemitah is not much better because all the food is growing, but you can't eat it until you get to the Korban HaOmer. So if you delay the year, make it longer, you're delaying the Korban HaOmer, and then people don't have anything to eat for another month. Emasai Regiim La'aver, Erev Shvius. So it used to be kind of a regular thing that the year before Shemitah was a year that would be calculated as a leap year. So based Rabbi Gamliel, now when Rabbi Gamliel's based in, they would calculate the year after Shemitah year as well for Shemitah year, for a leap year. And the reason why they would do so is because they had the following disagreement. Can you import food from outside of Eretz Yisrael? If you can import food from outside of Eretz Yisrael, there's no problem with worrying about a leap year on the year after Shemitah. You can just import your food. Why do you have to worry about you don't have to worry about the food in the storehouses. You can import food. So the question is, could you import food or not? They're going to see that the problem of importing food is that the ground outside of Eretz Yisrael, the rabbis established and made it so that it was tameh. They said all ground outside of Eretz Yisrael is impure. They did not want people leaving Eretz Yisrael. They said all the ground outside of Eretz Yisrael is impure. So therefore, if you had vegetables with dirt on it from outside of Eretz Yisrael, it could bring impurity into Eretz Yisrael. So they didn't want to potentially import vegetables. So that was their argument. So, we are not allowed to import for Rabosenu Hatiru. But the Rabosenu, they said it was okay. My Beinahu, what's the argument between the two? So, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Choshishin legushe hineke beinahu. The question is, when you're importing vegetables, are you worried that dirt will be attached to the vegetables or not? Rabbi Gamliel was not worried about that. Therefore, he allowed the importing of vegetables. Therefore, you can have a leap year the year after Shemitah. However, if you were worried about bringing dirt from outside of Eretz Yisrael into Eretz Yisrael, then they couldn't import the vegetables, and therefore it was a really bad idea to have a leap year on the year after Shemitah when there was nothing to eat. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis learned. Ein ma'avrinis hashana mipnei ha'tuma. We're not supposed to make a leap year because people are impure. The first thing that you're going to do in your new year is you're going to start getting ready for Pesach, right? Nisan's coming, you're going to start ready for Pesach. Everybody, let's say this year, everybody's impure. Well, what are we going to do? So Rashi, for example, the Nasi was very sick, let's say, and you knew he was going to die in the next couple weeks, and as a result, everybody's going to be impure when it comes time to bring the Korban Pesach. So what should you do? Should you push it off? If you get to add an extra month, gives everybody time to become pure, and then you've got a Korban Pesach with everybody being pure. So Rabbi Yehuda, so the issue is like this. We have a argument about something called Tuma Hutra B'tzibur or Tuma Dechuya B'tzibur. Tuma Hutra B'tzibur means that when it comes to communal offerings, if the whole community, really you're supposed to be purified when you come to the base of Mikdash and you do your offerings. However, if the community, the majority of the community is impure, so then you can bring your offering anyway, even impure. So that means that the Korban Pesach can be brought. As we say nowadays, we can bring a Korban Pesach. We're impure. Doesn't matter. Everybody's impure. Therefore, a Korban Pesach could be brought. That's not a problem, right? Knowing where the Mizbeach was supposed to be, that could be a problem. But other than that, the fact that we're impure is not a really problem, not going to stop us from bringing a Korban Pesach. So now, is that because when everybody's impure, the laws of Tuma are temporarily suspended? Which means ideally that isn't the way we want to do it. But because you have no choice, we'll allow it. Or do we say once everybody's impure, all the rules of spiritual purity are abandoned. We don't care anymore. So now, if I have a situation where the entire congregation is impure, is it better for me to delay and do it with purity and make everybody pure? Or does it not matter? They're already impure. It doesn't make a difference. It's just as good impure as it is pure. That's the conversation. So, we're not going to push it off. Why? Because once everybody's impure, it makes no difference whether you're doing it in purity or you're impure. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Ma'avrin, Rabbi Yehuda says, no, we're going to delay a month, give everybody a chance to become purified, and it's better. You're right, you can do it if everybody's impure, but it's better to do it when you're pure. Therefore, Tuma Dechuya B'tzibur, we're only going to be allowed to do it if we have no other choice. But if we do have a choice and we could just make a leap year, that's a better choice. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, Maisa b'Chizkiah Melech Yehuda. There was a story. Chizkiah Melech became king, and we'll stop after this, but we want to at least turn the page. Chizkiah Melech became king. His father was a really bad king, Achav. And it's good to know a Navi, right? So Achav was a really bad king, and when Chizkiah was a really good king, took over, the first thing he wanted to do was get rid of all of the idols. Now, idols are tameh. So therefore, midrabanan, rabbinic impurity for anybody who touches an idol. So he had to get rid of all of these idols from every place.
Right. He brought the Yehuda and Yisrael sort of back together in a way, did he not? He was like, that was his goal. Like he was a great.
He could have been Mashiach.
Yeah, that's what a lot of.
Now the thing with Chizkiah is that yeah. So anyway, so what happens is he is making this calculation now. Everybody's impure. Should we delay and add an extra month into the year or not? Now, if you just read the Psukim and you don't read this Gemara, the Psukim seem to imply that there were some tribes in Ephraim and Menashe and they weren't purified yet, and they came and they brought their Korban Pesach not the way that it's written in the Torah, and Chizkiah was davening on their behalf and Hashem forgave them. Okay, that's what the Psukim seem to imply. But we're going to see from the way that the Gemara is reading is it wasn't that so simple, right? Because if they did the wrong thing, so then why were their sacrifices allowed? Why did the base of Mikdash, did they take them? So what happened is Chizkiah himself was the one who realized that, hey, everybody's impure. So you know what we should do? We should push it off. So here's what happens. Ma'aseh b'Chizkiah Melech Yehuda she'iber es hashana. He made a leap year. figuring that it was going to give everybody time to become purified. But then he realized that was a mistake. He should not have done it. Now we're going to discuss tomorrow what was the mistake, what was this all about, and he davened. And well, who was he asking for repentance for? For himself. He was asking for forgiveness for himself because he made a mistake. Because the pasuk says, and here's the pasuk: Ki marbis ha'am rabas me'Ephraim Menashe Yisachar Zvulun lo hitaru. There was a whole majority. There was a majority of the people that came from these tribes of Ephraim, Menashe, Yisachar, and Zvulun, and they did not have a chance to become purified. Now, ki achlus haPesach below kekosov, and therefore they ate the Korban Pesach not from the Torah. As we're going to see, why? Because they were so many that were not purified, he decided that we are going to delay by an extra month, and as a result of delaying the extra month inappropriately, it caused everybody to eat their Korban Pesach a month later, not in the time that the Torah would have prescribed. Ki hispalel Chizkiyo aleihem lemor. When Chizkiyo davened for them, it says Hashem atov yichakar ba'ad. So he says that Hashem, you should bring repentance on behalf of myself and behalf for doing that.
It doesn't work out the Pesach Sheni anyways.
Yeah, but Pesach Sheni doesn't work that way, right? Pesach Sheni isn't for the congregation that is tamei. Pesach Sheni is for the individual who's tamei.
No. I know, but like it works out anyways that they did bring the korban. They do end up.
If you're not chayav a korban Pesach, right. If you're not chayav a korban Pesach Sheni and you bring a korban Pesach Sheni, that doesn't work. Korban Pesach Sheni only works for those people that were supposed to bring a korban Pesach. So these people, if they were supposed to bring it on this day, and then they didn't because Chizkiah told them wait a month, and then they came a month later and brought it a month later, that it's not, don't worry about it, it's Pesach Sheni. No, since they were not obligated to bring a Pesach Sheni, they were supposed to bring it on the first one.
I'm just wondering if they're b'diavad, they would be considered, they would be
no, messed up.
Okay.
And now we're going to discuss the Aveira and what each person thinks the Aveira is tomorrow. We got to stop here.
Still, by the way, I don't get the cheshbon of how 6 months, because Tishrei is the 7th month.
Yes.
Nisan is the 1st month.
Yeah.
That means 6 months.
You can't do it in Nisan, right?